Let's talk about, according to the United Nations, of the 48 countries poorest in the world, 36 are African. Niger, Republic of Congo, Mali, Burundi, Central African Republic, Somalia, South Sudan, and Libya are the countries with open wars and conflicts. And very critical situations are lived in Sudan. However, Africa is still on the move. Not far, the continent has combined GDP is similar to that of the powers like France, United Kingdom. A commercial union began to work, and this may be considered as a powerful declaration of intentions in a moment of open and simultaneous disputes. The president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, says, "We must be able to achieve the trip that Africa so much wants." What is he talking about? What is that Africa wants? The AFCFTA is the free agreement trade. We're asking ourselves, is this a leap to effective to the union of the region? We'll be analyzing this topic with our guests and with our information. After the approval of the respective national parliaments, last Thursday, May 30th, the African Free Trade Agreement, AFCFTA, became into effect, an agreement whose addition protocol was signed at the meeting of Kigali, Rwanda, on March 21st, 2018. 52 of the 55 countries that form the African Union are incorporated. The document is called Agreement to Establish the Free Trade Area of Continental Africa. The African heads of state and government had already declared their intentions in Lagos, an action plan in 1980. 11 years later, the Abuja Treaty establishes that the African economy, community, and since then, not much has been done, except for the celebrated 2063 agenda that collects the Pan-African vision through the following aspirations: achieve a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth, sustainability development, integrated continent, political unity, and based on ideas of Pan-Africanism, and an Africa that is global, influential, strong, united, and resilient. The Egyptian president and leader of Abu Fattah Sisi in last February in the Summit 32 of the organization celebrated the agreement and put emphasis on the problems. We have to address the deep causes of the crisis of our continent and focus our efforts on solving the problems of refugee, internally displaced, migrants in a comprehensive manner, along with the programs and the construction to give peace and security to our continent. This is how the Egyptian president saw it. And the head of the Commission of the African Union, let's hear Moussa Faki Mahamat on a speech in June 2018. Economic integration responds not only to the aspiration born from the Pan-Africanism, but also from practical need linked to the economic viability of the continent. In fact, the celebration of this extraordinary summit has generated great expectations all over the continent. Our people, our men, our businesswomen, and our young people in particular cannot wait anymore to see the barriers that are breaking the continent, obstaculizing our economy, and perpetuating misery at a time where Africa is full of wealth.
Así lo decía Moussa Faki Mahamat en Nouakchott, la capital de Mauritania. Fíjense ustedes, hay opiniones en contra.
There are opinions in favor and against of this union. A pessimist vision is the one of Pablo Rosa, who wrote from Cape Town, Africa, and published in the media Spanish public, and it says, Africa opts for a dangerous free trade agreement while the world has a protection tendency. What he says is that up until now, bilateral treaties like the subscribed by Angola and Zambia have been inefficient to improve commercial exchanges. Far beyond the tariffs, the difficulties for the continents are born from the corruption that tarnishes each transaction, and above all, the lack of infrastructure. In 2015, 75% of the roads the continents were not paved. In Brusha, one of the main arteries of commercial traffic between Kenya and Uganda, there was just an asphalted road, an immense straight line where trucks do not stop circulating, loaded with products. Transporting them from one village to another can be done on foot or on motorbike when the roads are in better conditions. So, infrastructure is still precarious. This is what Pablo Rosa said. This was June 4th. To advance, we recommend the following publication. It says, AFCFTA, the birth of the largest free trade area in the world, a point of inflation for Africa. It's by Odomaro Mugambisi, professor and investigator. And he says that the treaty will be engaged by 52 member states, who combined GDP will reach more than $2 billion. Commerce within Africa is expected to grow 50%. In addition, there is no doubt that eliminating trade barriers between the African states will improve the region. Integration, reduce reduce commercial tariffs, and in the long run achieve what the African want. The cost of the trade within Africa will be much less than international trade. But the main benefactor is the free movement of people, goods, and services among the African states. It is estimated that the African economy will grow twice as faster than in other regions. Faki Mohammed, the president of the Commission of the UA, defended the benefits of the treaty, ensuring that economic integration responds not only to the aspiration of Pan-Africanism, but also to a practical imperative that is strictly linked to the economical viability of the continent. From the capital, let's analyze all of this. They're both contradictory. From the capital of the Democratic Republic of Congo in Africa, Oscar Epelde brings us to necessary information. Hello, Oscar. Hello. 52 of the 55 African states have signed the protocol for the Free Trade Agreement as first step to the creation of an economic space without tariffs, internal customs that will be one of the largest in the world, with a population of 1,200 million people and about $3 million of the gross African interior product. The treaty has automatically entered in effect past May 30th, since 23 of the states have approved it in their respective parliaments. The objective is to promote inter-African trade, and increase could be up to 52.3%, according to the Economic Commission for Africa. It could be expected that the products manufactured by the companies of China, the United States, the European Union, Russia, and Turkey in any African country will circulate through a vast market of 1,200 million people with very low cost. This union will present itself as a test for the democracy. It will multiply the relationships between countries and cultivate mutual trust. There could also be consequences. What is attractive to this treaty, it is undoubtedly all of the products that have been produced could circulate in a vast market of Africa. Africa. This becomes attractive to all of these countries. Niger, the greatest country of Africa, still does not sign. Its president has asked to request the sectors of the country due to the fear that the Nigerian market is invaded by products, and this may damage the productive fabric of the country. However, Abuya does not want to miss this train, and some leaders have manifested that they will not sign. They will sign. Benin and Eritrea have not signed the agreement, although the promise that the treaty will foster industrialization, for example, in textiles in Benin. The dependencies of imports, exports of products outside of Africa are sometimes barriers to the Union, and that is what will be overcome. The market of products manufactured in China will also change, although China compensates this risk with the Africanization in what it has been introduced in almost all countries of Africa. Time will say if the benefits of this inter-African treaty are important or necessary to cure the fragility and vulnerability that still lies in many African populations. Back to you, Latin America.
Gracias, Oscar, por todas
Thank
las
you, Oscar.
precisiones informativas que nos das a esta hora y además desde el continente que estamos abordando hoy como objeto de
for all the
estudio.
information that
Y
you have.
se nos ocurrió una pregunta ya
So
para
we
ir
were
a la
thinking of
pausa y tenerla
questions.
allí como generadora en la mesa de jugada crítica para
So let's
nuestro
see what the
intercambio,
question could be.
en un primer momento con el análisis. ¿Es este acuerdo
Is this
acaso un logro
agreement,
político que supone la anhelada integración,
will it
eso que
create
decíamos, del panafricanismo
integration
y
of
la
Africa
disminución de las trabas comerciales
and diminish all of the barriers in the commercial
países
aspects?
tan diversos, tan diferentes entre
Will
sí
be able to be
radicalmente?
done with countries that are so
Allí dejamos
diverse?
ese interrogante, pausa, como les
Let's
decía,
set
nos
the
corresponde
question
hacerla y ya
and we'll be
venimos
right
con la
back.
primera parte del análisis. No se vaya. AFCFTA.
The African Continental Free Trade Agreement.
Esa especie de juego de letras. Bueno, Acuerdo de Libre Comercio Continental Africano, que constituye el bloque.
It constitutes the largest commercial bloc in the world.
Oscar Epel de decir en la primera parte. Su desarrollo
It was agreed in January 2012 by the African Union. The Charter Protocol was finally signed in the first quarter of last year. It came into effect on May 30th. It has 1,200,000,000 consumers and a gross interior product of $3.4 billion. We add more information to this context piece. The agreement began after a meeting of the African Union on March 21st in 2018 in Kigali, capital of Rwanda. It began to work when the 22nd country of the continent adhered. The operational phase will begin on July 7th in Niamey, Nigeria's capital. According to the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, the agreement could increase in African internal trade by more than 50% by the year 2022. However, there are still pending points. For example, the products that will be exempt from the taxes have not been agreed upon, taking into account that they want to eliminate 90% of the tariffs, nor has it been established where the country's headquarters will be. At the same time, doubts have arisen on how the agreement will impact among nations that have diverse development. That is, it is unknown how and where it will affect somebody if they have so many asymmetries. Among these African countries, the one with the most manufacturing industries will produce and be more competitive. In general, it is considered that they would be the most benefited, the ones that have their industries based on manufacturing and agriculture industries. Not so positive for those who are based on extractive minerals. However, the main states have called this agreement as historical for the creation of a free trade area and believe that it will enhance the inter-African trade. The commercial trade between the nations of the continent is low if compared with those of other regions, since it's only 17% of the total trade in Africa. Let's start this first part of analysis with our guests. We are talking about two guests. One, Sergio Galeano, specialist in the history of Africa and of the nation generally, and Mariano Saravia, journalist, writer, university teacher, and conferencist.
En política internacional, periodismo histórico y derechos humanos. Bienvenidos ambos.
Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being with us. I ask Sergio first. A treaty for a single market without tariffs, a common area of free circulation of people, and monetary union in a geography that totalizes a diverse and numerous population comes into effect. What is your vision, Sergio? Well, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. First of all, I think we have to understand that this will be a step-by-step process. And little by little, they will have to understand what a common market means. A single currency. These are the objectives that have been already stated in the creation of the treaty. The idea was to have a single market for Africa, and this might potentialize African development. And something that seems obvious and less relevant is that that's linked to development and everyday economy. There are many doubts in this respect about the national economies in Africa. And you find that the level in general of African countries is very low. So, if this is the case, they're not the conditions are not so favorable for them. I don't agree that just creating a single market, all the problems will be solved. This didn't happen in other places, in Europe, America. So I wouldn't just throw it in there saying that that's going to be so. In any case, there are common goals, and this is an advance for the region. But I think it's important to follow up on everything that's been proposed. Economical growth, same currency, especially so it won't just be in making the market bigger, where the biggers win and the losers do not. It would just widen the gap. I would be careful in that sense. It's very important that this is not the solution to the problems that we're commenting. Thank you, Sergio. I would like to ask Mariano, is that it's very hard that development might grow in the same way in these more than 50 economies that are different. So is there a relevance in this? Could you develop?
Gracias por la invitación y
Thank you,
un
Lucia.
saludo para todos los compatriotas de Latinoamérica. Para Sergio también no pude entender.
I wasn't able to hear my
repetir algunos conceptos
my
Sergio,
fellow
pero,
colleague.
Coincido en que es muy importante.
I totally agree that it's very important.
Parece que es una potencialidad muy grande la
That's a
de África,
very high potential that what Africa has.
Creo que la clave será de lo que decía vos, Lucía.
But I think that the key is not just stay in what it is, just an economic agreement, or just a business agreement. Not just stay in this one. This was the mistake that, in my view, Mercosur did in the first years. But on the contrary, advance at the rate we can toward an alliance. They will have to be cultural and political, without saying that these 55 countries have to coincide culturally, but no, not necessary, but to have a common objective, both culturally and politically. So they could, because otherwise they might have the problems that the European Union has. We see the differences and the problems. Countries like Germany and Greece, the UK, France, at the top of the development, and Greece, Portugal, Ireland, a step behind with lots of problems too. I think the best example is Greece. I think Africa has two great potentials. For one, the people. Their people, they have an average of 19 years old. In 2020, they will be 20% of the world population. And on the other hand, the world resources they have. Africa is not rich. They're not poor. They're rich, but they've been sacked. They've got 95% of mineral reserves. Bauxite, old, diamonds, petroleum. They have everything. I think the key is not to just leave it as an economic agreement. And even worse, if we want a copied recipe of other blocs based on the neoliberalism, because everything bad that has happened to Africa is also due to what they have as an inheritance from Europe and the colonialism. Nevertheless, the news are very good. They would have to also integrate it on a military level, and the fight against terrorism, and many other things. Africa will have to find their own way, and I take advantage of this, what you've said, to post my next question. If we see that Africa is so rich but sacked, with this leap, what are the barriers that they have? And what are the challenges they're faced with? Well, I think that in the first place, economically, the great barrier is to think of themselves in a continental perspective. As we said, yeah, there is this colonial heritage. But yeah, Africa is integrated to the world market. But in a very vertical way, each country has their own contact. They all have isolated economies. So I think that the great problem is to be able to have a continental economy and to complement each other. For what we see now is that nowadays most African countries produce the same thing. The same products. And there are many competitors at the same continent. So when they go to the rest of the world, they're all selling the same thing. In the 90s, this started in the 90s when each country started to negotiate on their own and then negotiated the same products. We should think now on like a global, like a continental bloc. And to put in all of the infrastructure and technological resources to help the producers. And on the contrary, instead of having individual markets, we should integrate the whole continent. I think that's the greatest challenge. As I said, it's a process that begins now. It's very positive to think in continental terms. But it requires a strong and decided political decision. So what is important is to start building the politics of this. And it would be so helpful for all of the African citizens. Thank you, Sergio. Thank you, Sergio, very much. I would go back to our other guest, Mariano. As we saw, there was an author. He said that Africa is going to a dangerous free trade agreement, and he says that it's a dangerous agreement. I would like to go back on this. As we described, Africa has many difficulties with this. Why are they contrary positions? Because on one hand, it says that it's very hard for these treatments to overcome all of the differences of each country. What do you say, Mariano? Well, I go back to what I said already. I think that the key is always going to be the politics and the will of the people through their governments to integrate and not oppress through other ways. And integration can also be an oppression, just faked as integration. When Hugo Chavez said that there was the need for ASA, that was a African and Latin American convention. It was based on mutual help
con UNASUR.
The same thing we did in Latin America with UNASUR, now destroyed by the neoliberal governments. I think that there are ways to help the smallest and weakest countries. We have to understand that either we save all of us or none are saved at all. Africa has suffered the same division that the Latin Americans have decided. So that risk is still there. The risk that South Africa, Kenya, the most developed economies could impose themselves and take unfair advantages over other smaller countries. But there are also the possibility that there's an integration, like the one we lived in South America since 2001 until 2014-15, something based on solidarity and mutual interests. That is possible. We have shown that it is possible. And Africans have to stop having this idea that they're always the backyard of the world. Africa was the scenario of the Cold War. They're still suffering the consequences of colonialism. As we said, they have to join together based on their own reality. There were some lines that they have to cross. Africa has to invent something, just like Simón Rodríguez said. Or we reinvent ourselves or we just fail. They have to go back to their bases. Thank you very much, Mariano and Sergio, two of our guests that have been able to help out in our analysis. Let's bear in mind, we have to see if there are differences of a free trading agreements with others. Is there a difference between what is being proposed in Africa, according to the treaties and protocols that have been established, with respect to the policies of other actors in the world, and if there's any similarities that have been done in Latin America before. So we have to see the geopolitical aspects of Africa.
Valga la cacofonía, son determinantes en este estudio.
It is important to analyze this. Let's go to a pause and we'll be right back. Well, in this critical moves, we're talking about Africa and the free treaty agreement. First, it's necessary to go to the map to see aspects of the geopolitical of Africa. And it evolved. Africa is the third most largest continent after Asia and America, with 30 million square kilometers. That represents 20.4% of the total lands of the planet. To north, it borders with the Mediterranean Sea, to the south with the Indian and Atlantic Ocean, to the east with the Indic, Asia, Red Sea, which divides it from the Arabic Peninsula, and by the west with the Atlantic Ocean. It's connected to the Asian continent through the Isthmus of Suez. It has 1,000,000 7 million inhabitants, most under the age of 30, which gives them an advantage, although almost half are very poor. And the wars have led all of the young people to leave, to flee. They've tried to reach Europe. Climatic change and terrorism makes it very vulnerable. It is divided in 54 sovereign states, 2 states not recognized, which are Saudi and Somalandia. Additionally, territories of the sea, of which are the Great Britain, St. Helena, and it's divided in 5 subdivisions: Africa North, South, East, West, and Central. To understand it, we must see that it's rich in natural resources: hydrocarbons, oil, gas, gold, other minerals necessary for the technology of the present, like uranium, cobalt, lithium, magnesium, and rare lands. It is important to understand that is rich in natural resources.
Cobalto, litio, magnesio y las llamadas tierras raras.
The possession and abundance of these resources and the invasion of previous years to send some African people as slaves and at the same time dominate those lands has made colonialism something present in the continent. Some countries still have their presence in Africa, like what we have now. There are still Francafrique. The European Union helps military the countries of Sahel, Chad, Niger, Mali, and Mauritania. With the excuse of confronting terrorism, the United States has displayed military force over there. They have military bases and has intelligence service actives. And multinationals exploit the natural resources. Likewise, the United States also tries to control the navigation routes. Latin America, there's also the presence of China that also have differences with it. And they have some agreements that have to go with infrastructure, roads, airports, cities, while they keep on having diplomatic linkages. Several organizations operate in the continent, like African Union, the Economic Union of African Countries, African Bank of Development, and New Society for the Development of Africa, just to mention a few.
En la locución anterior, para no confundir, más de 1.000 millones de habitantes en el continente.
It has more than 1,000 million inhabitants.
Bueno, para la continuidad del análisis recibimos en nuestro estudio a Reinaldo Bolívar.
Let's reserve Reinaldo Bolívar.
De la República Democrática del Congo, director del Centro.
He has a PhD honoris causa in the University of El Congo. Hello, Professor. Thank you for being here. What would you like to add? I would add the discipline that Africa has been gaining from the year 2003, when the African Union was created. You know that Africa has become maybe the continent where there has been more intentions of integration. At some point, there were general elections. I would say that America and us are not that same, because in terms of integration, Africa began in the 60s, but really took off in the year 2000. And it might seem surprising, but the development has been huge. I'm talking about the zone of free trade. But you were saying in the last images
Bueno, eso es cierto, pero quiero referirme a eso.
But I want to talk about those
Ahí
aspects.
está la Comisión Económica del África
There we have the Economic
Occidental,
Union for
la Comisión
Africa.
Económica del África Central, la
And-
de África Oriental, la del África Austral. Cuatro, por decir,
We've got
todas las que son
4 types of organizations.
tienen ya la
They have
mayoría de ellas,
the
la
majority
teoría
of
de
them.
integración, sabes que la teoría de integración tiene 5 fases, ¿no? Zona de libre
The majority adhere to this
Unión Aduanera,
developed
Estado
process,
común, comunidad económica y unión política. Ya es
which entails not only economic
la Comisión Económica de África
linkage, but also cultural.
está entre una mezcla de unión aduanera,
So now
aduanera
it's a mixture
a
of
mercado común.
customs integration
Nos conseguimos
to the
cerramos
common
por
market.
ejemplo, en 15 países del África Occidental, hay
In
una
15
moneda
countries
única. Si bien
of,
el francés es una moneda única,
of Africa, they have a single currency.
permite la compra de bienes y servicios.
And this allows you to buy
Tienen un
goods
banco
and services
que es
everywhere
el
in these
desarrollo.
15 countries. They have a common bank.
Pasaporte común desde hace mucho tiempo.
They have a
Desde hace mucho tiempo.
common
Aquí hablamos
passport
de Mercosur,
from many years ago.
Sur, que han buscado pasaportes comunes, lamentablemente por ahí vemos que están
Here in-
terminándolo en azul.
In the States, we haven't been able to.
La gente, estos 15 países representantes,
These
tienen pasaporte
15 African
común. Una
countries
aspiración que está buscando
have an
toda la
aspiration
África reunida en la Unión Africana, o sea,
that all of Africa is
estados
seeking.
soberanos. Quiero decir esto porque,
I want to say this
como dicen por allí,
because
callando, están haciendo un trabajo
we think it's important to say that they're doing a job from 20 years ago
está siendo analizado
that is not
con
being
la pertinencia
analyzed
del caso.
with the
Hablo
importance of
de
the
la
case.
perspectiva científica y no romántica.
I'm talking from a scientific perspective, not the romantic
Parece,
aspect.
pobrecito, qué bueno, ojalá que, o no han hecho tal cosa. Pero la perspectiva científica,
The scientific
hay unas
perspective
demostraciones
has showed
muy pertinentes de lo que está haciendo el continente africano.
of what the African continent is doing.
La Comisión Económica de África Oriental, donde
There's
están
another
Kenia, Tanzania,
of
Ruanda,
Union of Kenya, Uganda,
donde
Burundi,
quiere estar también el nuevo estado de Sudán del Sur.
this new country of Sudan of the
Ellos
South.
están ya en
What
una
they're doing,
tercera etapa de
they're on a third phase of
el
integration.
libre comercio fue superado hace mucho tiempo.
So this has been
Ellos incluso
already done, this free trade.
de ir hacia una unión política en el menor tiempo posible.
And now what they're trying to do is to go to the political integration.
Se quemó las etapas, pero ¿desde cuándo? Desde 1947.
This has been happening
Entonces,
from
¿está
1947.
con este tratado de libre comercio que
No, no.
entró en vigor?
So
No es un salto.
it's not a leap with this last agreement, it's just a continuity.
Estas comisiones de las cuales estoy hablando
These commissions I have been talking to you about are within the scheme of the African Union.
en el 2003 en CITRE,
When in 2003 the African Union was created, they agree
comisiones subregionales
that the
van a
sub-regional organizations will work
dentro del marco de la Carta de la Unión Africana
towards
ir hacia un proceso.
complying with the charter of the African Union.
Por ejemplo, nosotros tenemos aquí en
For example,
para hacerlo más potable, tenemos en nuestra América la ALADI, la
here in America you have
de
ALADI,
Libre Comercio e Integración,
which is the Free Commission of Treaty of
el Acuerdo
of
Marco de
Business
Integración,
and Integration.
y esa, a través de lo que se llama regionalismo abierto, fue la que propició
And that
que surgiera la comunidad andina, que
that
surgiera
treaty was the one that fostered the
el sistema de integración
Andean community,
la CARICOM,
CARICOM,
entre otras. Entonces, el
among
acuerdo
others.
madre para África es la Unión Africana.
So something important for Africa is the African Union.
Cuando todos estén preparados,
When everybody's
las
ready,
comisiones,
all of the commissions are ready,
las integramos, ¿me explico?
then we can
Y hacemos
integrate
la
them.
zona de libre comercio.
We can make the
La
zone
zona
of
de libre
free
comercio
a free
tiene, por
trade.
supuesto, una serie de pautas, una serie de que tiene la teoría.
¿No hay allí un arma de doble filo?
Isn't this a two-sided mirror?
Para potencias extranjeras, por ejemplo,
It might be risky
los
too.
anteriores invitados y también decían, bueno, ciertamente hay países
In fact, there are countries
tienen un menor desarrollo,
that have less
más
development
precarios, tienen más
and more
pobreza,
and are more
en
precarious.
este momento y siempre está el riesgo de que puedan
And
quedar
there's-
rezagados de ese desarrollo.
Also the risk that you might be left out.
Se le quiera llamar. ¿Tú cómo lo ves?
Sí.
How do you
Todo está
see this?
debidamente, planificado en la teoría de la integración.
Everything has already been planned.
Más que de la teoría de integración. Yo voy por el integracionismo, lo que llaman
I
política.
totally strive for integration.
En la teoría de la integración,
In the theory of
los
integration,
estados
countries
firman un acuerdo como este,
sign
que
an
tiene las bases,
agreement,
tienen su manera de integrarse. Por
and
ejemplo,
they have,
o sea, yo digo, yo
and each country has
produzco 100
a way to integrate them.
100 elementos, 100 bienes, quiero proteger de estos 100, 70. Y estos 30 son los que van a estar protegidos.
And there's also economic terms that you have to analyze.
45 de los 70 que necesito. Eso es una manera que son las tarifas arancelarias.
This is a way to establish the tax fares.
¿Qué puede generar que no esté Nigeria?
This might cause Nigeria to leave.
Más grandes del continente.
What do you think? I think that all of them are present, although some have not ratified yet.
¿Qué puede generar? Para África como tal es importante la presencia de
This might generate
180 millones de
180 inhabitants.
Etiopía, Egipto, Tanzania, la República Democrática del Congo, Sudáfrica, bueno, juntas suman
Well,
600 millones de habitantes. Por tanto,
600 million
son
inhabitants.
para las
So
empresas, para los empresarios muy apetecibles.
there are huge markets that are very juicy for business people.
Lo que es retrasar un poco que ingresen productos que quiere Nigeria a esa zona.
There's,
Una cosa, yo conozco muy bien la economía de Nigeria.
I know very much the economy of Nigeria. I've been in this country. It's been an economy
lo que se llama la canasta alimentaria.
that they can self-produce all of the food they need.
Comen los productos básicos producidos
So
en Nigeria, un territorio
they eat the basic foods produced in Nigeria.
Venezuela. Por tanto, lo que yo
So
creo que
therefore,
los nigerianos están diciendo que dejamos que entre,
I think that what they're saying
se produzca acá, porque la integración es la teoría de la complementariedad.
is that integration is the theory of complementation.
Para producir
So we have to complement
lo
each
que
other
otro necesita.
to produce what the countries need,
Necesitamos. Lo que pasa
what we
es que hay un
need.
momento cuando-
But
que
there's a
pasó en Europa,
point
que pasa en otros países, que te dicen, mira, ya
that
no produzcas
what
tal
happened in Europe.
producto porque o tal bien, porque a partir de la teoría
In some countries, Europe countries say,
comparativa,
I'm not going
sale
to
más
keep
barato
on,
que produzca, por ejemplo, Benín y no
I'm not going to keep on producing something because it's cheaper for another country to do so.
Ahora, ¿tú miras alguna diferencia
Do
entre
you see
integración y
any difference
sí, hay una integración.
with this
De un tiempo
integration?
para acá, podríamos decir,
Well, yes, there is.
desde
From
los
some
años
time
90
to
del siglo
here,
pasado,
like in the
se
90s,
agregó una nueva etapa,
there was
que
another
es la unión
phase.
política, a la
That
cual
was
no ha
the
podido llegar
political
la Unión
phase.
Económica Europea, que hoy en día es Unión Económica. Unión Económica es
So
para el
it's different. It
tercero,
goes beyond
seguridad
just the
completa
economic
de los
agreement.
trabajadores, de los productos,
This is just for products,
comunicaciones,
workers,
pero no
telecommunication.
autoridades comunes, sobre todo
But what I'm saying is
como
common authorities that are centralized, like president, a vice president,
político.
a parliament for its own.
Parece mentira en algunas otras situaciones, como fue el caso de Colombia, la gran
This happened, for example, in Colombia
soviética que integró a
and
15
Russia,
países,
who
la
integrated 15
Yugoslavia
countries.
de Tito, entre otras. O sea, ahí está hay una diferencia fundamental.
So there's a
La
fundamental
unión política
difference.
sería más beneficiosa. Sin
The
embargo,
self-politics are far more beneficial. However,
unos elementos distintos a otros acuerdos.
we might have to do
La
so.
Unión Africana tiene, por ejemplo, una fuerza de seguridad común.
For example, a common security
Una
force,
suerte de cascos, no sé el color que usan ellos, verde, etcétera.
something like
Que son fuerzas
green
de paz
helmets,
que han sido
that they're
utilizadas.
just peace forces.
Tiene,
This has been used by African Union.
de un pasaporte común.
They already have
La fase de
a proposal for a common passport.
La Unión Africana tiene una autoridad única, que es la presidencia.
African Union has a single authority.
En tiempos de Gaddafi se pidió transformar en autoridad única para darle más peso político como tal. Ellos,
By which they can have policies in common.
o de una federación de estados de África. Por supuesto, cuando hablamos de unión,
Of course,
estatus superior a la integración, porque la unión
when this was proposed, it had a larger status than the integration.
todas las dimensiones, mientras que la integración es la dimensión.
So what we have to do is integration.
¿Alguna diferencia de este
We were
tratado
asking if there's a difference
respecto de
between
los
this
suscritos con anterioridad?
this one and the ones that have been signed before.
Tenemos preparada desde el equipo de producción y luego
We've got something prepared by production.
descifrar eso.
Este acuerdo de libre comercio africano es similar a
This agreement is similar to the European Union, which implies the free movement of merchandise, people, and investment. Analysts are in favor of the free commerce and say that it's conservative because it would liberate 90% of taxes and have as a base for this comparison the agreement between Morocco and the European Union, which established the free entry to the old continent for 100% of products produced in Morocco. A difference with the is that it is not integrated to Nigeria, which is the biggest economy of Africa, and they are not in because they are afraid that their own markets would be affected. Another difference is the capacity of infrastructure, because in Europe there is a strong railroad that joins the whole continent. However, Africa's connections are not good. 90% of people are done by roads, where 210 square kilometers have train. So it's 7 times bigger than Europe, and it doesn't have such good infrastructure. Another element different is that one container takes 2 weeks to go to another port, where in Europe and America it's only one month. This is very interesting. I would just like to make an observation. There's a tendency that looks like Europe, but that is only one phase of integration. Right now we have other points of integration in ASEAN, which is in the PEC. There must be at least there must be several other agreements, like at least 25 more attempts in the world. The good thing is when they go to the next phase, to the customs integration. And the United States fears these communities a lot because they always try to restrict the commerce with the U.S. Could you tell us about the interest of extra-regional actors? Well, let me just tell you something. France has like 900 multinationals. And that has not generated development. Because when a company is going to come to a country, you would think that the country is going to approve. However, there are cases where it is positive. Not all of them. Some measures say that Africa does have a strong possibility of growing because so far they've grown. I was commenting that when the program began, that there's a very important element for the integration. It's that they have common characteristics far different from those of Africa. Because there's a puzzle of diversity of nationalities. But Africa has a common culture. Most of them are Bantu. I always tell my students that a person from Senegal goes to Benin or Gambia
pasa porque son sus familiares. Hay unos laxos.
They always pass because most of those people are relatives.
Yo soy yoruba, yo soy amarico, que hace que la integración sea
And therefore the integration
muy importante.
is very important for them. That's why there's common passports, because they have elements of roots that facilitate the integration.
Qué interesante. Gracias.
How interesting. Thank you very much, Professor.
Sabemos que usted se dedica a estudiar e investigar estos
We will be calling upon you
Hasta pronto,
on
un placer haberle tenido.
on next
Pasamos a
programs.
nuestras conclusiones.
Thank you. Let's go to our conclusions.
Allí lo teníamos, África,
There we
con su
had
diversidad étnica y
Africa, with its diversity in ethnic and in common origin, is trying to set its own path,
el concepto
a
de
path of integration. It's the concept of the United States of Africa exists since 1920, and it's one of the most strongest promoters in Africa.
con la participación de fuerzas de la OTAN y posteriormente asesinado. Y eso ha traído años muy complejos.
All of the conflicts they've had have even brought them more together. A data that's important is that it's expected by 2050 that the number of inhabitants goes up to 2,000.5 thousand millions. And about this agreement, let's not just talk about the free trade of merchandises, not only economic, but let's see what could be the maximum challenges. Let's expect that there's a cultural, comprehensive unity. Let's see if this is possible. Of course, there are barriers, but the governments are willing to overcome these challenges. Thank you very much for being with us.